Resident Evil Requiem is the biggest horror game of the year so far. As a fan of the series since the very first game, I was excited to dive back into the world yet again, and this one mostly didn't disappoint. That being said, there are a ton of secrets, hidden details, and Easter eggs to find, and here are just some of my favorites. Here are 9 things you might have missed in Resident Evil Requiem. Number 1. So much foreshadowing. Resident Evil 9 contains a ton of foreshadowing to characters and events that will happen later on in the game. Very early on, while Grace is walking the streets of Renwood, you can find this couple standing around having a chat. The man is wearing a trench coat and hat which looks eerily similar to Mr. X, an enemy you could find in Resident Evil 2 that would indeed return later on in this game. But this man is stood next to a woman holding an umbrella, which also somewhat makes its return this game too. Funnily enough, a lot of these NPCs are using umbrellas, and one of them even remarks that it always rains in Renwood. This is probably why the Renwood Hotel didn't completely burn down after the fire. Alyssa did mention that it was really raining hard that night. But this also foreshadows that Umbrella is about to leave its own mark on Renwood too. I guess it's true what they say, when it rains, it pours. This isn't the only foreshadow to Umbrella's return in the story. We can find this picture several times throughout Rhodes Hill that is in the same shape as their logo. It appears to be made of blood vessels branching out in the middle of someone's chest. First, a foreshadow to the importance of blood in the game, but once again a nod to the idea that Umbrella is at the heart of all of these problems, even after it has supposedly been defeated. The big reveal near the end of the game that Elpis is an antiviral was also foreshadowed right near the start. During Leon's visit to Rhodes Hill Care Center, you can spot a file on the desk titled Panacea. Panacea in Greek mythology is the goddess of the cure. The term panacea now means something that can solve all problems and cure anything, which is exactly what Elpis is, at least in terms of Umbrella's research and their viruses. This mythology also foreshadows the revelation that the password for Elpis was hope, since Elpis is the Greek goddess of, you guessed it, hope. Once again in Greek mythology, Elpis was one of the many items locked inside Pandora's box. Once opened, many different maladies were unleashed upon humanity, changing the world forever. This analogy works very well with Umbrella, whose research can be seen as its own Pandora's box, with Elpis locked away within it too. There are also a ton of little foreshadows to gameplay events and mechanics. This sign foreshadows the truck mini-boss. This one, warning you to keep quiet, foreshadows several enemies that react to noise, and there are several warnings that subtly let you know which areas have the most enemies. Finally, back in the streets of Renwood, you can find this sign which has the word connection twice, which might just be a hint that the connections are involved in this story, which we of course find out later they are. Number 2. Lots of little jokes. One thing Capcom loves to do is hide little jokes around their games for people to spot, and you can find a bunch of them in that early Renwood area. You can see that the stores accept card payments, most notably they accept Monster Card. The Pringles in this universe are raccoon branded because, of course. We have 9-Up and Spirit, as well as Fantasy Cola, and this store owner is also an emergency locksmith. You could say they are a master of unlocking things. The music poster here contains a pun that contains the title of the series. The barbershop here might just be a nod to Leon Hair Kennedy, and it could even be a callback to how Leon's hair has changed color several times over the years. Speaking of changing over the years, in the final cutscene of the true ending, one of the BSAA agents assisting Chris's Wolfpack looks suspiciously like the Chris Redfield we meet at the end of Resident Evil 7. This Chris looked totally different to the Chris we last saw in RE5, leading many fans to question if this was a redesign or something else entirely. Now a man who looks very similar is handing Grace a hot drink as Leon looks over and asks,
"Where is Chris anyway?"
No idea. I'm sure I'll run into him at some point.
Again, maybe a coincidence, but possibly Capcom poking fun at the difference. Victor Gideon calls Zeno nothing but an imitation, which is either a nod to him being a clone of Wesker, or a joke about how he's not as cool as him, maybe even both. Speaking of Gideon, he wears a snakeskin jacket, a snake eye ring, and even licks his lips, like a snake. Well, in the basement area, you can find a table where some staff were playing cards. One of them has a flush, one a royal flush, and the other, well, they had snake eyes. Snake eyes is the term used in dice gambling where you roll a double one, usually the worst possible roll. Sometimes people use the term more generally to mean you have nothing. You could call this hand snake eyes, but ironically enough, both Gideon and Zeno bet on Spencer's research and ended up with nothing as well.
Ain't no way, Kevin. You got snake eyes.
Number 3. John Cena is in the game. Seriously. Now, speaking of jokes, I might be crazy, but I think there is a John Cena reference in the game. During Leon's return to Raccoon City, you can find one specific missing poster that has survived all this time. This one looks suspiciously like actor and ex-wrestler John Cena to me, and it's alongside a message asking, "Have you seen my son?" Now, obviously no one has because you can't see me. But this isn't even the first time Capcom has referenced John Cena. During an Elimination Chamber in 2025, John Cena famously turned heel, a term for a wrestler who changes from good to bad or so on. The twist in character is something that Albert Wesker did at the end of Resident Evil 1, and Capcom even made a reference to this with John Cena's own heel turn. Now, who did John Cena turn heel on? Well, Cody Rhodes. Rhodes Heel Care Center? Perhaps this is all just one big coincidence, but I think it's more likely that someone in Capcom is a big wrestling fan, and that's probably why we keep getting all of these roundhouse kicks. Number 4. Zombie Talks. If you've played or watched this game, you will no doubt know that this new strain of T-Virus works differently to the one that was unleashed on Raccoon City the first time. These zombies retain some of their humanity. They will talk, use items and weapons, and even display some of their behaviors from before they were infected. But this actually isn't the first time we have seen a zombie talk. In the Resident Evil 3 remake, we see the moment that Marvin is bitten. He was taken surprise by Brad Vickers, a STARS member and the helicopter pilot from the first game. He's also a secret zombie you can find in the original RE2. Just as Marvin is about to shoot Brad, he says sorry, but Brad repeats the word back to him, which surprises Marvin just long enough for Brad to lunge on him. While these zombies are no doubt very different from those originally infected with the T-Virus, this links the two and shows how the basic structure of this virus is still there. I will say these zombies having personality was done very well. They still felt like zombies even with their mutterings and odd behaviors. Many of them will plead with you to run, suggesting there is still a tiny sliver of their consciousness left behind. On my first playthrough, one zombie even begged me to wait as I was about to finish him off. He said wait, he was like, wait, don't shoot. This now makes me wonder just how many of Resident Evil's monsters still contain that shadow of their humanity, and I wonder if Capcom will expand upon this idea in future installments. This also foreshadowed Emily's turn to monster and eventual redemption too. I wonder if we're going to have any of the main cast have regrets for all those zombies they've killed along the way. Number 5. Callbacks to previous Resident Evil games. More than any other Resident Evil title, Requiem features a lot of callbacks to previous games, both classic and modern. Obviously, Leon returns to Raccoon City and there are a ton of Easter eggs here. The STARS office remains mostly untouched after all these years, except suspiciously Wesker's photo of Rebecca has been moved to the library. This was an odd photo you could find in the original RE2 inside Wesker's desk. He's never beating those allegations. Perhaps this is why the photo has been moved. Wesker came back to hide the evidence. Rebecca, you can do better than a man who only lasts 7 minutes. But the game contains a bunch more callbacks like this. Right at the start of the game, you can find Grill 14, a nod to Grill 13 in Resident Evil. I guess they've been trying to get this grill up and running a few times now. There are a bunch more buildings like this which are nods to previous games, but you can also see signs and bottles of Dolby beer. Dolby was the location of Resident Evil 7 in Louisiana, and the Dolby incident was something that Alyssa Ashcroft was investigating as we found her note in that game too. There are bottles of Winter's Wood in the care center, a reference to Ethan and the Winters family. The bottle you open to solve the puzzle in the elevator room is a bottle of Sanguis Virginis. This is the Maiden's Blood wine that was made at Castle Domitresque, and a wine that I made a whole theory on. Oswald Spencer was close with Mother Miranda after she saved his life, so it makes sense that he would have a keepsake like this. We also find a portrait in his office with the letter M, which is likely a portrait of Mother Miranda. The book in the orphanage, The Quiet Old Castle, is also likely a reference to Castle Domitresque, and the toys in the orphanage are a reference to RE0 and RE1, with the train and the mansion from both of those games too. Instead of Star's team, we have Teddy Team. Leon drives past the gas station from the RE2 remake. His Jeep is still there after all this time, as is the truck that crashes, separating Leon from Claire. You can find a giant alligator soft toy in the orphanage, a reference to the giant alligator in the sewer in Resident Evil 2. The giant plant we fight in the game is called Plant 43. This is the next experiment after Plant 42, the giant plant that you had to deal with in Resident Evil 1. In Grace's FBI report at the start of the game, we see the name E. Wilkins. This could be a family member of Mark Wilkins, who was another playable character in Resident Evil Outbreak, the game that Alicia Ashcroft was introduced in. Mark Wilkins was noted to have a family, so this could be one of them. Another name in this file is M. Warren. This is likely Michael Warren, the mayor of Raccoon City and father of Catherine Warren, who was the girl you find murdered by RPD Chief Brian Irons. Michael fled the town, leaving his daughter behind, who was later found by Irons. He wanted to turn her into human taxidermy, which is incredibly creepy. You can find Tricell barrels in the ARC facility. This shady company, which was made up of 3 major sectors, including, you guessed it, pharmaceuticals, was involved in large-scale bioweapon research after the fall of Umbrella. They were a major player in Africa during the events of Resident Evil 5, which saw Chris and Sheva take on Wesker.
Ah, I see you watching this Tericho video. I hope you're enjoying the content. You know, smart people click the like button, but the smartest people click subscribe. Remember, I'm always watching.
Number 6. Barry's Secret Stash. Barry Burton was a member of STARS and frequent aide to Jill Valentine in the first Resident Evil. He was a family man, which was how Wesker managed to blackmail him into betraying Jill, Chris, and the rest of STARS. During Resident Evil 9, we can find remnants of Easter egg hunts Barry left for the other STARS members. Following these hunts leads you to unlock a locker which contains a number of Easter eggs. First, we can find a copy of the original Resident Evil, among other games, and also a console that looks kind of similar to a Sega Saturn, but also kind of similar to a PlayStation. It's a Sega Station. But the reward for this treasure hunt was 2 tickets to Raccoon City Zoo. Not only is this another nod to the idea that Barry really was a good guy before Wesker threatened his family, but it could also be a little hint to Resident Evil Outbreak. The zoo was a location in that series home to all manner of infected animals. We also see a billboard to the zoo in Raccoon City, so I wonder if this is a hint that we will one day get a new Outbreak game or perhaps a remaster. But I think the game is definitely hinting at some future games, just in a slightly more cryptic way. We'll come back onto that later. Number 7. Hunk and Tofu. Resident Evil Requiem features a ton of callbacks to classic Resident Evil games, but particularly Resident Evil 2. One of the most fun callbacks is to 2 unlockable characters from the original game, Hunk and Tofu. Both of these characters were unlockable after completing both Leon and Claire's scenarios. They each had their own minigame, and Hunk's was even canon to the story. Hunk was an agent working for Umbrella. He was one of the soldiers you see in the cutscene at the start of the game, sent to steal the G-Virus from William Birkin. Hunk was the only surviving member from that squad, and he managed to escape Raccoon City with a sample of the G-Virus, earning him the name the 4th Survivor. The other 3 being Leon, Claire, and Sherry. Yeah, just forget about Ada and especially Jill because, you know, Capcom certainly have. Hunk has since gained a reputation for being a cold-hearted and ruthless agent. He cares only about his mission, and this has earned him the nicknames the Grim Reaper or Mr. Death. Despite that, very little is known about Hunk, where he came from or what his real name is. People have long speculated that Hunk is an acronym that stands for Human Unit Never Killed or Non-Killable, because he always seems to survive when others do not. In Resident Evil 9, Leon finally gets to meet this mysterious character. The Commander, as he is called in-game, is clearly Hunk. His outfit might be slightly different and he's lost his helmet somewhere along the way, but there are several clues that this is indeed the same man. He has the same gas mask with that signature red glow, but he also talks to Leon like he has known about him for a long time. As one of the Raccoon City survivors and as someone who has worked for Umbrella and now the connections, Hunk would absolutely know about Leon. But if you want even further proof that this is indeed Hunk, after Leon defeats him, Hunk's glove is knocked off. But this reveals that he has the same T-virus infection symptoms as Leon, something that only affected Raccoon City survivors. Then there is Hunk's axe. You can loot this item after you beat the commander, and its description talks about it having a long bloody history. It even says it's an instrument of death, as in Mr. Death. It even does have a slightly scythe-like design, which again makes sense as Hunk has been called the Grim Reaper. Finally, one extremely interesting detail is that Hunk might not actually be dead. If you leave the area and go back, the bloodstain is left behind, but Hunk's body mysteriously is missing. Yes, while the corpses of generic enemies will disappear in the game, the developers made sure to keep Mr. X's body around permanently. Hunk's body being gone makes a lot of sense now that we know Hunk is also affected by the T-virus like Zeno and Leon, and I am absolutely sure this isn't the last we've seen of this character. After all, he is called Human Unit Never Killed. But Hunk isn't the only callback to those unlockable characters. Throughout the RPD, you can get several glimpses of Tofu. Tofu was a silly character you could unlock in the original Resident Evil 2. He was ironically the most difficult one to unlock, and his mission was also quite challenging. Just like in that original game, this character is nothing more than a silly little Easter egg, but you can spot him at several windows inside the RPD. Shooting at him will give you a little voice line, and he seems to appear a lot more after you escape Mr. X. Like I said, this character isn't technically canon, but for him to survive all this time, I guess that must have been what happens when an Umbrella employee dropped their lunch in the lab. Number 8. Classic music. Now this one isn't really a lore thing, but it's such a cool little detail that I just had to add it into the list. If you haven't looked around the option menus and bonus content all that much, you might have missed the option to turn on classic music and sound effects. Now I absolutely recommend that you do this, particularly for a second run of the game. Not only do you get the classic Resident Evil menu theme,
Resident Evil,
you also get the iconic safe room music. You get the perfect menu interact sound effect, and some of the music tracks in the game are even callbacks to previous games too. Just be warned, once you turn this option on, you probably won't ever turn it off. Number 9. Future game hints. RE9 definitely could be hinting that Outbreak is going to make a return. This game pulls a character directly from those games with Alyssa Ashcroft, and it would be a shame if after all those years this is the only time we get with that character. But there are also some big hints in the game about other potential future titles. In Rhodes Hill Care Center you can find a bottle of Avernico. If you unscramble the letters, this spells Veronica, a reference to Code Veronica, which is already speculated to be an upcoming remake. Thank you to Susie Spherehunter for spotting this one, because I spotted it, but my brain didn't work it out. Avernico. Oh, it's my cousin, Avernico! Code Veronica follows Claire's story after the events of Resident Evil 2, and it adds a ton of backstory and lore to those original 3 games. But we might even have a tease to a fan-favorite character finally making a return. The strangest thing about Resident Evil 9 for me was the lack of Jill Valentine. The main story of RE9, being Leon rediscovering his hope, seems like something that would fit perfectly with Jill. She survived the Spencer Mansion incident while witnessing most of STAR's team getting killed. She was betrayed by her captain, who also forced Barry to turn on her too. Then she returned to her home in Raccoon City, only to be attacked and relentlessly stalked by her very own nemesis. Then, if that wasn't bad enough, she was captured by Wesker, who experimented on her, mind-controlled her, and forced her to try and kill her close friend Chris. If anyone in the Resident Evil universe needs some renewed hope, it's Jill. Not to mention that Leon had this big emotional return to Raccoon City, but he wasn't even from there. He arrived in Raccoon City on the day of the outbreak, but Jill actually lived there. So to not see Jill or really even get a mention of her is a little bit odd. But once again in Rhodes Hill, you can find a plaque of names the treasures of Rhodes Hill. One of the names here is Valentine Levins. Maybe just a coincidence, but it does seem like a very specific name to put on this board. Now, there have long been rumors that Capcom are going to remake Resident Evil 1 in the RE engine. This would make a lot of sense since the RE2 remake was very well received, and even the RE3 remake, which was a bit of a letdown to many, myself included, still has mostly favorable reviews. Now, I know there's been a lot of debate about whether RE1 needs a remake, and no, it doesn't need one. But RE2 didn't need one. That original PS1 game is still one of my favorites to this day, but I think if they do it right, having a modern RE engine remake of the iconic first game could be a great time, especially since RE9 shows that yes, survival horror in a spooky mansion can work in the modern era. Just imagine hunters acting like the girl. And yes, I would love to see some of those iconic moments in the glorious RE engine. But I think it's even more likely that we will see Jill Valentine in Resident Evil 10. In this game, there are a lot of hints that Wesker could make a return. There is a lot of talk about cloning and consciousness transfer, and if there is anyone in this series stubborn enough to reject death, it's Albert Complete Global Saturation Wesker. To be honest, I think the 10th game seeing Jill and Chris finally team up again to take on Wesker would be a perfect full circle moment. Perhaps they would even need to assemble the entire crew, an Avengers level event with Claire, Leon, Sheva, Rebecca, Billy, everyone. Who knows, maybe Leon and Grace will be the ones to finally give Jill some hope. So there you go, plenty of Easter eggs and hidden details in this one. I could probably keep rambling on to be honest, but I'll be honest, I want to go back and play the game for a third time. If you like these kinds of videos, I make lots of them for different horror games, so maybe subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.